Well, we're on the cobblestone landing here, or the wharf as they might call it. The river fluctuates here about 40 feet during the course of the year, and this wharf is on a 6-to-1 slope. So if you do your math, for every foot the water goes up in the river, it goes about 6 feet up this slope here. So our water line fluctuates annually about 200 feet up and down during the course of the year. Makes it really difficult to build to that. And we've learned that many different times over the centuries here. Other cities like Louisville and Cincinnati have a constant water level on the Ohio River called the locks and dams, so it's easier to do it there. It's one thing people don't think about here. So in the 1830s, 1840s, when the steamboats started coming down, people get off that steamboat, they step their foot out in that mud, go about knee deep in the mud, pull their leg out, it might suck the shoe or boot off. Wasn't a friendly way to come to Memphis. So we started laying cobblestones in 1852, and over a 40-year period of time and 19 work sessions, we laid over 1 million cobblestones through here. Most of them came from Indiana. Most of them laid by Irish, by the wreckers of Judith Johnson, by the way, who got this is the largest historical wharf on the National Register of Historic Places, the oldest wharf in the country, Cobblestone Wharf. We feel pretty good about that. It has its own listings right here. This is called dead man rings here. Well, let's point down to the dead man rings. And a lot of the boats used to tie their cables up to these dead man rings. And the reason why they call them dead man rings, he's probably 150 years old here, is this slab of concrete that it's poured into goes down 6 feet. It's a big column of concrete that goes down 6 feet. What happens in 6 feet in a cemetery? It's where a dead man's buried. So dead man ring is what they're called. And there's about 50 of these all along here for tie-offs. This linear cobblestone wharf right here is about 2,100 linear feet. Used to go up past the new wall you see here, basically almost up past Riverside Drive. Riverside Drive didn't come till 1935. The railroad tracks came in the 1880s. Used to be entries at Court, Monroe, and Beale. Now, when they built the sidewalk here in 2002, 67 years later after they built Riverside Drive, they built a sidewalk. They closed off Court and Beale and made one entry in at Monroe here into the cobblestones. For about 25 years now, there's been no parking on the cobblestones. They used to park here all the time. Look at the old pictures, because they needed it for the people going up into the city working. But they built parking garages since that time and moved all the daily parking off of here. Only parking allowed on here is people servicing the riverboats or the river industry. There might be another boat come in and use these cobblestones, or the Corps of Engineer work barges and things like that, and those are the ones they're allowed down here. You can see the conditions are really bad. There's been a plan for about 10 years to do a restoration, and what they want to do is get some of these potholes out, some of the broken cobblestones up. Back in 1984, there was a little 2-story building over here at the bottom of what's called Fourth Bluff Park. It was Confederate Park then. It was an Illinois Central building that wasn't being used anymore, but they used to switch. There used to be 3 lines there. They used to direct trains in and out, and that's where we had a storeroom for our supplies, our sand and our cobblestones. A little old man named McKinney, when the water went down every spring, still have the key to that room that's gone, and we used to let him in and come in. He would do what he could, replacing potholes all up and down here as they sunk in when I had all the water up here in the high water time of the year. So basically this water comes in March, April, and May when the snow melts up north, the spring rains are up north, comes up high, usually goes down in May or June. This year, 2019, it stayed up pretty much over 25 feet for most of the year, which is a historically long length of time for the water to be at that level. And that affects throughout some of these other areas. For instance, at 28 feet on the local river gauge, the land across the river in Arkansas floods. You can't get the crop in early, you know, things like that. But this is the highest piece of ground on the Mississippi River, so downtown Memphis will never flood. It will fall into the Riverboat earthquake before it will flood, I predict. I don't predict an earthquake, I'm just telling you, it ain't gonna flood up there. It'll flood in Little Rock before it floods way up there. That's 60 feet higher up there. It's 200, we're standing at about probably 200 feet sea level right now, and the little milestone marker in front of the law school is 272 feet sea level. So to get up there, that's another 60 feet up. And when you get up that high, you got to start going out that way for miles and miles and miles. You used to flood 35 miles in that direction, you see. In fact, when they built the levees, Crump wanted to sue Arkansas because they're bringing all that water used to go out into Arkansas, was being thrust up in the Gayoso Bayou and up our riverfront, you know. So we've always argued over water, and the levee project is very important. So hopefully soon the cobblestones will get fixed. Some of these asphalt and concrete placements on top for servicing over the last few years. I poured that asphalt right up there for Captain Jake's motorcycle. We said it was for wheelchair access, but it was for Captain Jake's motorcycle to be level. Now you know the rest of the story. I worked down here running the Memphis Queen line from 1993 to 1998. I was the general manager. So we're going to get those cleaned up. As we look, as Willie spans down and we'll walk down here, you'll see some of the driftwood that comes up. So when the water's rising up, driftwood comes from Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, no matter where. Then when it starts going down, the driftwood snags. This piece of driftwood here probably be about 40 feet long. You see, I've seen pieces over 100 feet long snag up here. It's amazing. And that has to be cleaned off. You can't throw it back down into the river because that's considered jetsam. You know, you get in trouble for doing that. So they'll come by and clean it up soon and get it hauled off by truck. Annual cycle every year that's happening. Then hose off some of the mud. You don't want, because you'll see the mud will sit here, it'll rain, you'll track mud all over the dock, so you got to come out here with a hose and hose the topsoil of the water off every year. The electrical poles will come out that you see here. Those will be put subterranean down to the docks in a modern form. Again, nothing's really been done to these cobblestones since 1891. Really, there's been bit and piece repair or things poured on top of the cobblestones. This is where the city began industrially. It was our industrial harbor up to the 1950s, all through Wolf River Harbor here, all the way down past Tom Lee Park, up to the bluffs up there to the warehouse district. In fact, Monroe is 80 feet wide and Court is 80 feet wide, Monroe is 60 feet wide, and Union's only 45 feet wide because the mule wagons going up Court and Monroe needed a wider street to tack going back and forth to get the heavy loads of cotton up to Cotton Row. They couldn't come straight up because it was so steep, you see. So that's a little thing right there. The bookend parks, it used to be Jefferson Davis Park and Astor Park. They became Tom Lee Park in the 1950s and River Garden over here in 2018. They were made in the 1930s there when Riverside Drive was built, and Tom Lee Park was expanded by 20 acres in the 1990s. Now, as far as the Memphis Queen Line fleet goes, the Memphis Queen 2, the boat right here on the very end without the red feathers on top of the smokestacks, that's the one the historical markers for up here at the foot of Monroe. It was built by the Dubuque Boat and Bowler Works in Dubuque, Iowa, the first all-steel hull passenger vessel on the lower Mississippi River in history. 1955 came down here. Captain Ed Langford brought it down. And then Tom Meanley was a newspaper reporter and photographer for the Memphis Press Scimitar. He was covering agriculture in the Delta, so he came down to be a pilot. Captain Langford's health went bad, so in 1960, Tom Meanley bought the company. And a couple years later, he built the Lorac. It's a 64-foot ocean-going sailboat in his backyard in Whitehaven on Shelby Drive and towed it down here. And then in 1964, the Memphis Showboat you see right here in front of us was a barge, a party barge they brought up to here and built the first, second decks and the pilot house right there on the river, the Memphis Showboat in 1964. And then as business grew, in the 1970s, Tom Meanley wanted to have a wedding boat, so he built the Memphis Queen 3. You got the Memphis Queen 2. The Memphis Queen 1 went on down to Biloxi. Memphis Queen 3 is the boat right here on the left, and it was built, the hull was built in 1977 in the backyard in Whitehaven, transported down up Highway 61 to McCutter Lake, towed up to here to the docks, and the first, second, third deck smokestacks and pilot house were welded out right here. It took 3 years to build this boat, the family and the crew, because they didn't like the prices they were getting at the shipyards, and the Coast Guard and the Corps of Engineers approved them to build their own boat. And it went so well from 1982 to 1984, the same formula worked for the Island Queen. We're going to be on the Island Queen today for the public sightseeing cruise. So you got a 4-boat fleet. Back when I was running the company back in the 1990s, we had 1,200 cruises a year, about 120,000 passengers. It'd be some Saturdays, we'd have a dozen cruises down here. It was a lot of fun. Go to New Madrid, we would go to Helena, we go to Cincinnati on extended trips for festivals. The King Biscuit Festival, and we started having about a once-a-month cruise down to Helena. It's a 7-hour cruise down and a 1-hour bus ride back, a perfect day trip along the river. Of course, the river fluctuates, like I said. We're about 22 on the river gauge right now, kind of moderate. You can see Mud Island coming out over there, the flagpoles, the walkway up here. We're going to walk down the cobblestones down here, look at a couple other things, look at the river gauge, and then get on the Island Queen today. Okay, let's go. Ecologically, I guess you would say, you can see you see how the water hasn't been up Nobody's come and treated the weeds, so these grow up. You get a beautiful wildflower field in here in August and September. You also see various levels of driftwood here that float in, you know. And then obviously the crews have come by and stacked some of this up so they can bring a truck out and get it removed. That piece is 36 feet long. You see some of the siltation that would build up right here. You see other pieces of wood. Then you see where the water went down real fast, and that part of the cobblestones are clear. So Robert, you had a drop a couple weeks ago, like a foot a day or something. And then it kind of slowed up, and you can see the siltation down in the last 10 feet right there that builds up. And the further you go down, there'll be siltation down there 2-3 feet deep down in there. You can see the Island Queen now going over. It's almost 1:30, time to start boarding the sightseeing cruise up the harbor to the helical ramp. Here are the utility connections when there was floating restaurants down here once upon a time. The electrical connections and the water, domestic water connections from the city came to right here, and they hooked up to their boats. And again, they had to hook up with hoses because they fluctuated up and down. You didn't have hard pipes, you know, they had to hook up from here. Could have to have 100-foot long hoses to get the water to your boat, or the power, you see. So this is a good view of how things can build up in different stages over time and weeds grow. It's the cobblestones. Let's go this way. This is one of our two river gauges, G-A-G-E-S. One's on the cobblestones here. You can see the number 30 right here, and then 6 feet up, 31. That's about a foot rise. So for every 1 foot the water goes up, it comes up about 6 feet. 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. And then there at the wall, it's a 1-to-1 slope going up to 48 right up there at the top of that to Riverside Drive. So that vertical scale was put in back when Riverside Drive did the sidewalk here in 2002. So this has been down here about 90 years, and it goes all the way down about 20 more feet that way too into the water. Of course, the water's up to about 22 right now. And you come and look at this, you see what the river gauge is. There's another river gauge down on one of the bridges down there as well, about a mile south of here, which means the water from an elevation point of view would be about a foot lower as we go down that way. Let's go this way. In 2011, we had the 48.3, the second all-time high. Water was up over the wall here into Riverside Drive from about right here down to the intersection. That's a low area right there. It starts flooding in there at about 42 or so on the river gauge. So it was about 2 or 3 feet deep in there, about the size of 3 Olympic swimming pools back in 2011, just like it was in 1937 when it was 48.7. You got comparative pictures that are really neat. And every national news anchor came in and stood with their ankles in that one spot and said, "Downtown Memphis, Beale Street and Riverside is flooded. Will there be a Grizzlies basketball game tonight?" Well, it's 40 feet higher. Yes, go home. So that's when I came out here with a portable PA system and started preaching at night over here about, because we didn't have anybody talking about it. Everybody was coming down, look at this high water, it was really neat, and tell them what those flags were and what the name of that bridge was and when it opened. And these other bridges, people had the name wrong. Some people haven't been down in 20 years, didn't know we had restaurants downtown. So I talked until the battery ran out. CNN and TNT were here, we ran them off. They fact checked me every night and said, "Y'all go down that Chafalaya, that's where the problems are in Louisiana, not here." Because they were just making it up. It really sometimes make you doubt some of the national news, what they're trying to do for stories. When you're watching what's happening and they're telling you 100% wrong, you go, wait a minute, how can I trust you for any other news you're giving? Don't come here and mess up my city. Conventions were canceling because of their news broadcast, you know? And everything was, I was driving Kevin Kane crazy. So we're about down to where we're going to Beale Street Landing. Our next stop, we'll pick up over at Beale Street Landing, I reckon, Willie. So this is a 5-level helical ramp. 1, 2, 3. This is level number 2 that has all the wood in it. There's one more full level below this as the water keeps on going down. So they're about 9 foot at each level as the river goes up and down. And then the ramp we're actually standing on right now is a hydraulic system that lifts up and down between. You see where the ramp, right over here, let's turn around this way, the ramp that goes into the helical ramp. As we start dropping, this ramp right here will come up. And we can have handicap accessibility at all time from ramp to ramp with this hydraulic system on this lower barge that's 200 feet long to the connecting ramp going in. So as we go down, probably about another 5 feet, this will go down, you hydraulically do it from below, and this connecting ramp will go in down there. You'll shut off that gate, and that's how we go up and down, have handicap accessibility year round. But you got to get those areas cleaned out. Even when they don't have, when the debris booms are up, it still has the muddy water gets in there and makes a siltation, but you don't get all this driftwood in there. It's nuts. Well, once again, we'd like to welcome you aboard the Island Queen Riverboat here, made in Memphis. Did you know that? The family and the crew here made this boat. It took them 3 years to build this boat from scratch in their backyard in Whitehaven on Shelby Drive and here on the riverfront. So if you look down here to our north, former Memphis Queen line in 1955, Captain Ed Langford bought the Memphis Queen II in it. It was made in the Dubuque Boat and Boiler Works up in Dubuque, Iowa. You can't see it from here, it's on the other side of the dock, but it was the first all steel hull passenger vessel on the lower Mississippi River, 1955. Tom mainly was a newspaper reporter, liked covering outdoors and the river, and he got a job as a captain on the boat here, the Memphis Queen II, and then Captain Langford's health started failing him, so Tom Meanley bought the company in 1960. In his backyard, he started clearing out the land because his dream was to take his wife Carol around the world in an ocean-going cruise on a yacht that he built in his backyard, 64 feet, called the Lorac, L-O-R-A-C. That's Carol spelled backwards, okay? Okay, and they never did that, but in 1964, they brought a barge up here, put 2 decks on it, made the Memphis Showboat. It holds about 600 passengers. And then in 1977, he wanted to build another boat. He had this kind of small Memphis Queen II, so he wanted to build a Memphis Queen III, and he did not like the prices he was getting from the shipyard company, so he said, we're going to build it ourselves. We've kind of built a showboat and an ocean-going yacht. So the next boat you see right there, there with the red paddle wheel, is the Memphis Queen III. That's the sister ship or sister boat to the Island Queen. So they built a hull in the backyard. It was 25 feet wide by 100 feet long, okay? And they started building that hull. This is in 1977, and it rained for about 2 weeks. So the neighbors started going, wait a minute, does he know something biblical here? Because he's building his boat in his backyard. And who's going to build a boat that big in somebody's backyard? How are you going to get it out of there? Well, they cut some more trees down. They got a house mover to come in down there on Shelby Drive near Graceland. Towed it like with a house mover up Highway 61 over to McKellar Lake, which is about 8 miles south of here. There's a boat ramp. They launched it into McKellar Lake, towed it up to here, put it into a dock here, and welded out the first deck, second deck, third deck, smokestacks, and pilot house. 2 years' time, the family and crew built that boat from scratch, the Memphis Queen III. Another little odd point about that, that was in August of 1977 when they transported that hull up Highway 61. The same day Elvis's funeral was going down Highway 51. There was a big traffic jam in Whitehaven that day, if you can imagine. And that's the Memphis Queen III. It's the dinner cruise boat, a real nice wedding, receptions. And then in 1982 when Mud Island opened, they wanted to build a boat for Mud Island and all their increased river traffic. This boat right here, the Island Queen, same formula, built a hull in the backyard in Whitehaven, towed it up here, welded out the first deck, second deck, smokestacks, pilot house, third deck. Took them 3 years to build from scratch. So this literally is a made in Memphis family and crew business. The owner right now, Memphis Riverboats, received the company from his mother, Captain Dale Lozier, and uncle, Captain Jake Meanley. He's third generation riverboat here. It's called Memphis Riverboats. And that's where they base out over there. We used to pick up from the cobblestones. And then in 2012, Bill Street Landing opened. And you notice you had to walk down this helical ramp rather than tripping all over those old cobblestones. You might have done that before in your life. And if you look at the helical ramp over here, there's 5th level, 4th level, 3rd level, 2nd level. You don't see the 1st level because it's underwater. And believe it or not, right on the other side of this 400-foot dock right here, under 12 feet of water, there is a 10-foot wide sidewalk at the 10-foot level of the river that goes from that helical ramp to the other side of that little island right there, or about 800 feet. So it's under 10 or 12 feet of water right now as our water fluctuates up and down. We're starting to come down. You can see the bank right here, the siltation. You see the grassy part right there, and you see the mud that's left behind after the water goes up. We'll explain that in a minute. Again, back to the helical ramp. You can see some of the mud stains on it because right now the river's at 22 on the river gauge here, but back in February it got up to 40 feet. So imagine the water being 20 feet higher. I'd be standing underwater right now, I think. up on that bank right there. You can see where that mud is up there, up on the 4th level right there. In fact, we were up on the top level coming down into that helical ramp. The water fluctuates here 40 feet during the course of the year, up and down, okay? 60 feet historically. So we were on that top level. Now we're down to the 3rd level. So when you walk in, you'll see some of the driftwood that's gotten into the helical ramp there. We'll have to get a chainsaw to cut it out. And then this hydraulic ramp you see right here on the southern half of this dock, that takes you up to the connecting ramp into the 4th level, and that fluctuates up and down. So every 9 feet, we raise and lower this hydraulic ramp to make it handicap accessibility at all time to the boat at any level of the water. For that time, you're tripping down the cobblestones. That's the Beale Street Landing helical ramp. We're getting ready. Got a few more stragglers here. We're getting ready to cast off, it looks like. Anna's down there in the concession stand. Katie took the pictures. Captain Jason West is up in the pilot house. Colton's our mate. We're going to take off here in just a minute. Beale Street Landing opened in 2012. If you've ever seen other big boats, passenger vessels on the Mississippi River from 2008 to 2011, there were no passenger vessels cruising, say, from New Orleans to St. Louis to Cincinnati to St. Paul. That business died during those recession years. The American Queen was brought out of bankruptcy, started landing here in 2012. Now we have the American Cruise Line and the American Queen Steamboat Company bringing 6 boats into Memphis. About 25,000 people annually. It's about a $42 million annual economic impact, so they'll land here as well. Memphis Riverboats here is the only locally owned riverboat cruising company on the Mississippi River between New Orleans and St. Louis. That's 1,300 miles of river. This is the only spot you can get it. Not in Vicksburg, not in Natchez, not in Baton Rouge. So this is a pretty special spot right here. Of course, you came down off that high bluff. You see the Memphis city skyline. Hey, look, there's a blimp. Of course, that's probably in town for the golf tournament. We now have the World Golf Championship FedEx St. Jude Invitational in Memphis, one of the top 8 tournaments on the PGA Tour. 45 of the top 50 players are here. A whole lot of international attention. So you'll be seeing blimp pictures on the Golf Channel and I think on CBS for the rest of the week here. This is the next level of tournaments after the Big Four. There's one in Austin, one in Europe, and one in Asia. So it's one of the top 8 tournaments in the world. It all started back in 1958, and then St. Jude and Danny Thomas got involved in the 70s and 80s and taken it to another level. So the bluff right here, if you look where the city downtown is, that's called the 4th Chickasaw Bluff, and that's the highest piece of ground on the Mississippi River between Cairo, Illinois, and Natchez, Mississippi. Cairo's up there on the southern point of Illinois, where the Ohio River and the Mississippi River come in, the confluence, we say, coming down. There's the first Chickasaw Bluff, is about 60 miles north in Fort Pillow. Second Chickasaw Bluff, 40 miles north in Randolph. Third Chickasaw Bluff, about 20 miles north at Beeman Shelby Forest State Park. Then here. This is why Memphis is here, because this water fluctuated 40 feet up and down during the course of the year. Imagine no levees over there. It used to flood 35 miles in that direction. Back in 1541 when Hernando de Soto came in here. Hey, Greg. All right. He came in here. He got on this high bluff. He thought he discovered the Pacific Ocean. He was looking for the Pacific Ocean and gold because all he could see was water from that high bluff up there. It's 35 miles. They thought the Ohio River flowed into the Gulf of California, not the Gulf of Mexico. The earth was flat at the time, right? You were there, weren't you? The earth was flat at the time. It was flat. No globes, no GPS. That's where we were in 1541. And that's 79 years before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. Think about that. When we were growing up, some of us when we were growing up, Plymouth Rock was like the Pilgrims landing. That's like the first thing. Memphis is an old area. We're number 6 on the National Register of Historic Places for listings in the country, behind Washington, Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, and New Orleans. We have over 10,000 properties listed here. So we're an old area. There's no city in America that tells a story of American history better than Memphis, Tennessee. Good, bad, or ugly. You look at our whole history, tell it all here. From the early Native Americans and European explorers to the 20th century entrepreneurs, from Civil War to civil rights, music, medicine, transportation, distribution. We'll hear a lot about that today. I got about 150 hours in my head and we got 90 minutes to talk about it here, okay? So I'm going to talk a lot real fast here. But we're going to load you up. Talk a lot about the river too. You got some kayakers coming down. We'll have to make way for them, huh? We're about ready to cast off. I'm glad we got Greg here today. Man. Again, when you're walking from one deck to the other, please hold on to a handrail up and down the stairs. Don't stand on the tables or chairs. Life jackets are located underneath the stairways and the foot lockers, or on the first level up in the rafters, let's say. We've never had to use a life jacket yet. Never. Okay. We're going to cast off in a second. Get out in that Mississippi River. Start heading down the river. Talking about some of those river facts. And then 3 short whistles. That's your standard. We're leaving the dock. Everybody got that? You hear that? I mean, when it's dark out here, when it's foggy, foggy is darker than dark. You can see in the dark. You can't see in the fog, you know. You can't see lights in the fog. That's why they give that signal every time they leave a dock. We're officially leaving here, heading out. Here we go. Now, we're getting ready to go into the channel of the Mississippi River. Now, the Mississippi River drains 41% of continental North America. That's 31 states and 2 provinces of Canada. Basically, everything between the Rocky Mountains and the Smoky Mountains flows down through here. The Missouri River starts up there. Its tributaries above Montana in Alberta and Saskatchewan flow all down to St. Louis. The upper Mississippi starts at Lake Itasca up in upper Minnesota. It's so shallow up there, you can basically walk across Lake Itasca up there. It flows down to the tip of Illinois, Cairo. And then the Ohio River starts over, the tributaries start over New York, western Pennsylvania, western West Virginia, come down to Pittsburgh, the 3 rivers, converge there, become Ohio, down to the tip of Illinois. And no river flows from the lower Appalachian Mountains to the lower Mississippi. Cumberland, the Tennessee, go across Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, up to Paducah. All that comes back through here, about an average of 330,000 gallons a minute at about 8 miles an hour. And every gallon of water has a teaspoon of mud. If you don't believe me, look at that bank right over there and see all that mud on the bank over there. So that siltation lays down. Memphis has been laying down here for centuries to make this the flattest place on earth, basically. It drops about 1 foot a mile as we go from north to south, from Illinois down to New Orleans in elevation. So it's really flat through here, over to the levees. We're up on a high bluff over here, like I say. So that is not a levee. That is a natural bluff right there. Man-made levees are about 5 miles over. So this is about a 5-mile wide floodplain. Right now we're at 22 feet on the river gauge here. If you look at the bank over there, it's about 3/4 of a mile away in distance. It's at 20. It gets to 28 feet on the river gauge. That starts flooding over there. So early this year it got up to 40. It flooded for 5 miles in that direction back in March and April. You know, it's okay. It's a floodplain. When that water goes down, then it becomes rich alluvial soil for cotton and soybeans and corn and things like that over into Arkansas there. So now we're out in the actual channel, getting away out of the Wolf River Harbor there, looking back. Riverside Drive that you came in on right there, it didn't open up till 1935. So the river went all the way to Riverside Drive. There was industry up. You can see some of the old buildings up there, and as we go through here, this was our industrial port for Memphis all the way up this harbor, which all moved in the 1950s down to President's Island. Now it's become residential in here, as you see. Tom Lee Park was built right here in 1935, a small 8-acre park about in the Beale Street Landing area. And in 1991, it was increased all the way down to the bridges there, about another 20 acres. So that's a 30-acre flat Tom Lee Park. Memphis in May International Festival holds its annual events there. The Beale Street Music Festival, the first weekend of May. 4 stages of entertainment, about 100,000 folks come down. The 3rd weekend is the World Championship Barbecue Cooking Contest. That's our cross between Mardi Gras and tailgating at the SEC level and Halloween. It's a crazy time down here. All the scaffolding in Memphis is tied up down here for about 2 weeks. And then the last weekend they have the 901 Fest and the half marathon, a Memphis Day of celebration. This year, Memphis in May honored Memphis because it's our bicentennial. We're 200 years old this year. Okay. Anybody older than that on the boat today? You are? Oh, you're just scratching. I thought, okay. So it's our bicentennial year from 1819. This is Tom Lee Park, like I said. And guess who it's named for? Tom Lee, that's right, you got that. There's no trick questions here. But back in 1925, the M.E. Norman was a Corps of Engineer boat expecting the river banks. We learning how to control this river. And it was about 10 miles south of here, and it capsized, and 72 people got thrown into the water. Well, a black riverboat man by the name of Tom Lee had a 28-foot John boat. And he's just gone down to Helen in a 28-foot boat, and he was coming back upriver, and he saw all these people struggling in the water. So he individually saved 32 people, brought them to the shore. He was declared a hero, which he was. Went to the White House, met President Coolidge. They gave him a house in Memphis, gave him a job in Memphis, and he passed away in the 1950s, and they named a park for him, Tom Lee Park, for his heroic efforts. There is a sculpture right down here. You can kind of see in front of the boat, right over here, a person in a red shirt on the land. There's a sculpture there of Tom Lee in the boat, reaching out to somebody in the river, pulling them to safety. Again, this is a 30-acre park, a real flat park right there. Look up on the bluff, you see the residential that has come in the last 20 years. This was all trade yards and factories and industry, and it's really growing right now. You can't build apartments fast enough in the southern part of downtown. The big tall building that approaches here was built in 1964 as the Riverboat got converted to a Holiday Inn hotel. Anybody heard of Holiday Inn? Well, in 1952, we in Memphis, Tennessee, changed the way the world traveled. We opened the first overnight roadside lodging chain in Memphis, Holiday Inn on Summer Avenue. Clemens Wilson did. He'd gone up to Washington, D.C. the year before on a family trip. Ford didn't like the roadside accommodation he was getting for his family. So he came back. He was building homes in Memphis at the time, and he drew up the perfect room of a family of 4, gave it to his draftsman, and he said, look, draw this up, make it 120 rooms. So if you can build a house, you can build a Holiday Inn, 120-room hotel. He franchised it out. That's how it happened. That draftsman, again, when you work for Clemens Wilson, you only worked half the day, either the first 12 hours or the second 12 hours. This draftsman was working at home that night, saw a movie Holiday Inn on TV, so he wrote it in pencil. That was the working title. That became the real name. No money changed for the naming rights of Holiday Inn. 1952, he built up to 1,700 Holiday Inns all over the world. And the family's still in operation here, Clemens Wilson. So that became the Riverboat Club. Now it's the River Tower. It's apartments and condos now. Within the trees here, there's Ashburn Coppic Park. The trees have kind of grown up. Every once in a while, they trim them down. You can kind of see a promontory up there at the top where you can see up and down the river from there. Q.T. Ashburn was a general in the Army in Europe. And in World War I, we're trying to get all these supplies over to the East Coast on trains to get over to Europe for the World War I effort. But all the empty trains are blocking the full trains. So he said, let's go, the steamboats have stopped traveling. So let's go put all these supplies on the barges and bring them up the rivers. And that's how the federal barge line started, Q.T. Ashburn. So it had a big port here. This park was named for him. And then in the 1960s, when the Riverboat was built, they wanted to come all the way to the edge. But a newspaper reporter by the name of Paul Coppic fought that. We had a lot of people fighting for our parks in Memphis in the 1960s, Overton Park being one in particular. And he fought it and got an easement put over here, so they helped name the park here Ashburn Coppic Park in his honor as well as you come around. So if you come up Tom Lee Park on the sidewalk here or ride your bike up, you can come up the hill, go through Ashburn Coppic Park. There's a nice 12-foot wide walkway around the bluff right here. You can see on the bluff where it's cut out. Coming down to Martyrs Park right here. All the way down through Tom Lee Park, all the way down to the pyramid, let's say. About a 2-mile pathway there. The next modern building is the Artesian. It opened about 4 years ago. Again, that's condos up there. Beautiful views up at the top there. Beautiful sunset. As you look over to Arkansas, that's a floodplain forever. There'll never be a modern building or a tall building built in there. We have gorgeous sunsets here all the time. You can see how high the bluff is right here. This area right here in Tom Lee Park was added onto in the 1990s. They just put in that rock dike right there and then filled in with dredge fill to raise it up right there. This is the original height of the bluff here. You can see up in the break in the trees right here, an obelisk, a granite, look like uprights there with a crossbar. That is our Martyrs Park memorial right there. And we going back upriver. We'll talk about that, I guess, going back upriver. In the trees here, you'll see a building as well. When we get closer to it, you'll see what it is a little bit better. That's the Unitarian Church of Memphis, the first Unitarian Church, it's called. Church of the River. And it has a real nice, huge plate glass window. So the sanctuary's coming down the bank, and all you see is the river right there through the plate glass window, the sanctuary behind the preacher. You'll see as we come into it right here. Church of the River, opened in 1964. And right next to it, you can't see from here, when we get further back from the river, will be our local CBS affiliate, WREG-TV on your side, Channel 3. Up here, Channel 3. So there's Church of the River. See how nice that is right there? So imagine sitting in the 8th row looking straight out at the river like that, you know, on the slope. Look at some of the driftwood in here that's piled up in here. Those are about 80 feet long in there. They get snagged up in the trees. I've actually seen a carp in the middle of these trees one time. He was floating down the river, got snagged up there. That's kind of cool. There's Church of the River. Now we're approaching the 3 lower bridges here in Memphis, and I'll just identify them here real quick. And since we're going slower on the upriver, I'll talk extensively about them. The northernmost bridge here is the Harahan Bridge. It opened in 1916 and 1917, and what I mean by that is there's 2 railroad lines on that. We're looking at the northern side, and you see kind of a modern fencing up there. Well, that was a cantilevered walkway or driveway there with wooden gangplanks across it. So by that time, we were having a lot of automobiles in Memphis, and that was an automobile drive there for the first time across the river until 1949. Now that is Big River Crossing. It's a dedicated pedestrian bicycle pathway only, the longest of its kind across the lower Mississippi River. This is a half-mile across the river right here. Then it goes another half-mile across the delta, all the way to West Memphis and Pancho's Tacos if you want to get some 3 miles to walk for tacos and have to walk back. The middle bridge here is the Frisco Bridge, opened in 1892. It's a single line railroad bridge. Both of these bridges are active. They just haven't been painted in about 80 years, huh? Then the lower bridge here, the southernmost bridge, is the Memphis and Arkansas Bridge. It does have sidewalks up there you can walk across, but you walk down into the expressway shoulder. That's not very safe. This opened in 1949 for Highway 70, and now it's Highway 70 and Interstate 55 from St. Louis all the way down to Biloxi and Gulfport, that Gulf of Mexico. Here is Economy Boat Store. Again, we'll get the full stories on the way back up. This has been mid-river streaming service for about 80 years now. Crump Park is right above us. So what happens here? You saw that barge tow just go lickety-split by us. You know, the trucks on the expressway stop at a truck stop. These barge tows don't stop at all. They don't downsize those engines at all. So these barges will come out, a little towboat. You got the potable water, the oil, and the fuel in there in the lower portion. Plus they need groceries or crewmen, they need the train. And these boats will come over and tie off those barge tows as they're keeping on going. And they'll offload the supplies and everything. And the boats don't have to stop. Midstream surface right there. And then the white tanks below us over here is the Valero refinery. A lot of petroleum comes up from the Gulf through there. It's the only refinery in the state of Tennessee. And all below us here, the river turns and goes to the west and then circles back around again to the southeast. That's what's called President's Island. It was an island once upon a time, and about where all that gravel is down there. The river went around the island on the east and the west sides, and in the 1950s, we built a road across there and cut that off and took about 20% of that island to make it what we call President's Island. That's our industrial port. And it's the second largest inland port on the Mississippi River. You see the upriver barge tow coming at us, and those are empty. See how high they're out of the water? They're empty there. We'll catch up with them in a minute. They're becoming upriver kind of slow. So President's Island goes all the way around right there and snakes around. The river just serpentines up and down, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. We're coming over to the Arkansas side now. So when we talk about Memphis, transportation, distribution, and logistics, here's our #1 employer in this area. What we mean by that is river, railways, roadways, runways. Okay, we're the number 2 inland port on the Mississippi River. We're one of 3 cities in America to have all 5 Class 1 freight rail operators in it. We're a big freight rail town here. We're I-40, the northernmost bridge, and I-55, the southernmost bridge, meet over there in West Memphis, about 7 miles that way. That's the 3rd largest center of trucking activity in America. There's one big truck stop over there, okay? I know one guy who has a station over there that sells 1 million gallons of diesel fuel a month. It's pretty good, isn't it? And then our airport, of course, we have the home of Well, we're millennials, right? I'm a millennial, right? We call it Federal Express. You young guys might call it FedEx. We had a man by the name of Fred Smith, went to Yale in the 1960s, got a C- on a term paper for the idea of overnight package delivery by air. How would you like to be that professor right now? And Fred still sends him his annual statement every year, you know. He employs 32,000 people in Memphis and 400,000 people worldwide, you know. So we're the #1 cargo airport in America for the last 35 years. So that's our river, railways, roadways, runways. That's how it all works right here. And these things will be getting out that way. Now as you look back over this way, you can see a little bit better the Tennessee shore. You see a white tent up there at Chickasaw Heritage Park, the bluffs, and the National Ornamental Metal Museum up in the trees. That's a part of an old Marine hospital from 1884. The tent's a part of the Metal Museum. The next closest metal museum is in Japan. That's how special that metal museum is. Smithy, a forgery, art exhibits, metal exhibits, parties, weddings, blues on the bluff. And then there's 2 ceremonial mounds up there in Chickasaw Heritage Park, formerly DeSoto Park. You can see a part of the hospital up there is being converted into condos as well. So that's the bluff right there, right below the lower bridges. That's the French Fort area of Memphis, just south. It's exit 12C, Metal Museum Drive. But in 1739, the French came up here and had a French fort called Fort Assumption. It didn't last very long because they didn't like the humidity or the big mosquitoes here, they say. This is a really nice summer day. You notice it's about 10 degrees hotter and about 20, 30 degrees heat index hotter too. July, you know, the air dies here. So we got a very nice day. And of course, with the breeze blowing here in the shade, I think y'all are doing pretty good. Looks like that Barstow's gaining on us up here. We'll catch it on the way back down and talk about those stats again. Hey, guess what? I'm going to say welcome to Arkansas. How's that sound? Y'all didn't think you were going to Arkansas today. Any suey pigs on the boat here? Okay. We're on the Arkansas side of the river. What that means, as the state boundary lines are being formed in the 18th century and the 19th century along the river here, they never changed, but the channel changed considerably as we're trying to learn to control the river. In fact, we had a big flood in 1912 and 1913 that did away with some of the towns over here on this side. And then in 1927, we had a huge flood that displaced 50,000 people in the area, did about $4 billion worth of damage. And so Congress created the Flood Control Act in 1928 and started building the levee system you see in the Delta here, the largest project in the history of the Corps of Engineers. You can't see it from here. That tree line over there, it's about another mile on the other side of that tree line, the levee system in this area. But it's such a big system that they say when the astronauts are descending on Earth. Anybody been in outer space here? Nobody from outer space? Okay. Well, when the astronauts are descending on Earth, the first man-made structure that's recognizable on Earth is the Great Wall of China, okay? And the second most visible man-made structure while you're descending on Earth is the earthen levee system of the Mississippi River. Not the Superdome, not the St. Louis Arch, but the earthen levee system, 300 feet wide, 40 feet tall, almost 900 miles long. It's a big mountain built all through the Delta here. You can't control the Mississippi River. You can only accommodate her, we say, you know. We've learned that a lot. Katrina, you know. It wasn't a hurricane that got us. It was the levees that broke in New Orleans, you see. They were worried about that just recently, you know. We got to take care of these levees. And by the 1937 flood, which was the all-time high, there wasn't as much damage. A real good book to read about that is by John Berry. Rising Tide is the name of the book. So you can kind of see the flat land over here. That's going to become farmland, probably soybeans. Hope they got it cleared out enough of time to plant a crop this year. This is way late in the middle of July here. Normally that water's gone by the 1st of June. So we've had about a 6-month extended session here. Again, you see these empty barges over here. They're high out of the water. You can actually see the numbers on the side. Their depth, they're 10 feet deep. Now, this is the Memphis and Arkansas Bridge. It looks like the traffic's going kind of slow up there today, doesn't it? This is I-55. Back in 1927, Highway 70 opened from San Diego all the way to New York City, the Broadway of America. It's one of the first paved sign highways in America. That was a big deal. And it came right through here. The Bristol Highway in Tennessee, the first U.S. highway in the state of Tennessee, our first state highway. That's it right here. 1949 is when it opened. and then it converted in the late 1960s to I-55 when the interstate system came in. You see the sidewalk on this side, it's about 7 feet wide up there, and again, it goes right down into the shoulder. You can just reach out and touch a truck if you're doing. I mean, you can reach out right there. That's a two-foot abutment right there. You can reach out and pat that truck right now on the interstate if you wanted to. Memphis and Arkansas Bridge. Now, the middle bridge here is the most interesting probably because in 1892, it was the second steel span bridge across the Mississippi River, the first on the lower Mississippi River. The first was up in St. Louis, the Eads Bridge in the 1870s. This was the longest steel span in the country at the time. We didn't really know what we had done. It's a single line railroad bridge. So the inspectors wouldn't certify it. We had to condemn it before we opened it. We called that typical Memphis construction, you know. And we got 18 locomotives, and we got volunteers to drive 18 locomotives across a bridge we wouldn't insure or inspect. And it didn't fall down, and they came back, and on May 10th, 1892, this bridge opened. That's what opened Memphis to the West Coast and the Asian markets. Because before that time, you'd be a train over here, you'd come down to buy a Economy Boat Store, 5 cars at a time on a ferry to come across the river. It'd take 2 days to get a train across the river. Now it takes about 3 minutes. So that was a big game changer there. And then and you see some of the new piers put in right here. Again, this goes about another half mile over the delta and gets down onto an embankment that takes you into West Memphis, Arkansas, up to St. Louis, or you can go out to Little Rock, Oklahoma, or down I-30 to Dallas. The Frisco Bridge, 1892, single line railroad bridge only. Now, they had wooden planks across there in between the rails, so if somebody wanted to pay a toll, they could walk across or take a carriage across. It wasn't until 1904 we really started getting automobiles in Memphis. And I really come forward now, Willie, wherever you're at, come forward here. This is where I ask everybody to come forward, because you can frame out the city of Memphis right here with these bridges. Look at this beautiful skyline. Look at the clouds I brought in today. Aren't you proud of it? I queued those clouds up for your pictures. You don't have to Photoshop them in. That's our skyline right there. So in 1904, we had 8 automobiles, and the speed limit was 8 miles an hour. In 1910, we had 1,000. In 1920, 19,000. So we had to build a bridge that could accommodate automobiles. Railroads had grown. So the cantilever support here is 14 feet wide, wooden planks on it. This was eastbound from Arkansas to Tennessee. The north side was westbound from Tennessee to Arkansas. That opened 1916 on the railroad, 1917 for the automobiles, and that lasted until 1949. We had so many automobiles after World War II. We had to build a more accommodating bridge. It was decommissioned in 1949, reopened in 2015 as the Big River Crossing. So if you come down here by the church on the river, you can walk out halfway. You don't have to go all the way across, because you got to walk all the way back. I learned to stop in the middle. But you get 60 feet above the boats here, looking straight down on the barge tows. You get a bird's eye view, normally you're at a distance. It's a really nice walkway. It's very safe. It's open sunrise to dark. And I encourage you. And then there's a LED lighting system on here. So if you're downtown tonight, once it gets dark, there'll be all sorts of multicolors and different vibrations or whatever, variations. Same thing with the new lights up here. I'll tell you about that on the Hernando de Soto Bridge soon. So Big River Crossing's been a big hit, a big success, connecting into Arkansas to some bikeways on the levees in Arkansas and Louisiana on down as we go green here, I guess you'd say. You can see how the currents get forced in. You see that little current coming here now, because the river goes from being 3/4 of a mile wide to a half mile wide through this little strait right here, and the current gets real choppy. We used to try to water ski out here, and that's just not fun to water ski. Mississippi River is not a friendly river at all. It's charming to write about and to look at and dream of the sunsets with. You can see some of the rock on the bank right here. That's called riprap. There's also concrete mattresses that have been put down to stabilize the shore. It's always good to have a grove of trees on your embankment like that, because the roots help stabilize the river. Now the Mississippi Flyway, there's a Pacific Flyway and a Central Flyway, an Atlantic Flyway. This is the Mississippi Flyway here. 70% of the migratory waterfowl in our country migrate annually from the Arctic to South America through. That's 300 species of waterfowl. There's about 95 species of fish in this river right here. I've seen some guys pull out some 100-pound catfish, you know, and they're really trying to show off. If you're ever trying to hold up a 100-pound catfish, keeping your back straight, you look like an idiot. You're straining. But we got big catfish out in here. Over here, 80 miles to our east is Stuttgart, Arkansas. That's where we have the annual World Championship Duck Calling Contest. Right there for about 80 years now. 60 miles to our east is Grand Junction, Tennessee, and the National Bird Dog Museum. Now that's not culture to some people, but around here, bird dogs are culture. So 120 years of the national field trials here. And then at Shelby Farms Park, we have the worldwide headquarters of Ducks Unlimited. Okay, so this is a big flyway here, a big outdoors area. You're 400 miles from the Gulf, you're 400 miles from the Smoky Mountains, 200 from the Ozark Mountains, a lot of boating, camping, fishing, swimming, hiking, outdoor stuff going on, all in this area here. That's why it makes sense to have a Bass Pro in the pyramid. We'll talk about that up later on. I guess it makes sense. I'll make it make sense, okay? Looking back over Martyrs Park, you can kind of see the obelisk now. Hey, he's catching up on us. But, and I'll talk about the Civil War in Memphis and the naval battle here, but Martyrs Park, we survived the Civil War pretty easily, basically. But after the Civil War, we said what the Civil War couldn't do to Memphis, the mosquito did. Didn't know mosquitoes. We didn't know it at the time, but the yellow fever came up the river in 3 series. In 1878, in the summer, we had 40,000 people at the city population at that time. 25,000 people deserted immediately, okay? I lived 15,000 behind, 5,000 died in that yellow fever epidemic. It's the single largest loss of life for any one event in the history of our country. Larger than the Johnstown flood, the San Francisco fire, San Francisco earthquake, Chicago fire, and the Johnstown flood combined. We went into bankruptcy for 14 years, weren't even known as the city of Memphis. We were a taxing district from West Tennessee. We had nuns come into town, the Howard Association, almost 3,000 nurses. A lot of people died. They just kind of paralyzed our city for a while. We formed our Board of Health. We found our first artesian well, 1887. In 1880, a man by the name of George Waring came to town. He thought it'd be a good idea to separate the sewage water from the drinking water. That's a pretty healthy thing to do, don't you think? We were drinking out of the Mississippi River here in the Wolf River. So he was the guy that cleaned up that area in Manhattan that became Central Park 30 years earlier, so he had a good pedigree. So we're the model for the industrial sanitary sewer in our country, the Memphis plan. I know you needed to know that, but that helped clean our city up at the end of the 19th century. Martyrs Park is dedicated to the memory of those who served and died, helping their brethren. Now look at this barge tow coming up now. See how high that barge is out of the water? All these are empty. Well, the lower barge, you see the high barges that are empty. Now you see the lower ones that are full going upriver. I don't know what they got in them to be that low at this time going upriver, but you can see the difference between an empty barge and a barge with something in it. Again, one barge is 35 feet by 195 feet long. It looks like those are about 20 on there, let's say. One barge has the same capacity as 15 train cars or 58 semi-trucks. So that's about the same as a train with 300 cars and about 1,200, I guess, trucks on the highway, drivers and tanks of gas. So economy moves slowly on the river. Coal, grain, petroleum, rock, gravel, sand, scrap iron. A captain, a pilot, 2 mates, several deckhands, and a cook. And the cook's the most important position, like I said. They don't stop. They're going upriver about 5 miles an hour. Come downriver about 10 miles an hour, you know. And sometimes it just says, that tree just hadn't moved in 3 days. You know, you're looking out there, I'm looking at that tree going upriver. I've been able to take this boat down to Helena, Arkansas for a day cruise before. We've done 7 hours down. It's a 1-hour bus ride back. We've taken it to New Madrid. We've taken it to Cincinnati for the Tall Stacks Festival before. So we've been all over the river with this boat in the past. Quite a few names for the Mississippi River. Old Man River, Mighty Mississippi, the Muddy Mississippi. Mark Twain called it the father of the waters. Mark Twain called it the Great Sewer. Because if you throw a cigarette butt down in Wrigley Field in Chicago, it'll go through the storm drain system It'll come by here sooner or later. You know, I've seen refrigerators, and I've seen cows on logs. I've seen chickens blown across the river, cars. You know, it's amazing, these 100-foot long trees. This really disposes a lot coming down the river here. Of course, Mark Twain was a great writer. Tennessee Williams, William Faulk. You think about the lower of the river here. When the people come on those big overnight passenger vessels, it takes 5 days to get to New Orleans, but you stop in Vicksburg and you stop in Natchez and do the land tours in Baton Rouge and Oak Alley. And I go check the manifest here, and 70% of those people taking these cruises here, kind of like y'all today, not many of y'all from Memphis, but they're from either the East Coast and West Coast America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. They're coming to the middle of this country. We're used to it. We see it every day. We want to go to Hawaii. We want to go to Europe, you know. Hey, Katie's walking around with the pictures, right? Stand right here. Wave at everybody. If you want your boarding photograph, this is Katie right here. Okay, and she'll circulate up and down, okay? You got it?
Okay,
all right.
I got it.
There you go. Where was I talking about? I forgot.
Going to Europe.
Going to Europe. So what they say when they come here, it's basically St. Louis to Memphis to the Delta to Europe. It's the Civil War, it's the civil rights, it's the authors, it's the food, more than barbecue, okay, in this area. A lot of Creole down in Louisiana. It's the music, unparalleled music in this area. They call that Americana. It's the lower Mississippi. They said there's only one river in America. That's the lower Mississippi River, the lower 900 miles, let's say. That's what we're talking about. There's 250 tributaries to the Mississippi River, but that's what they really like. There's a lot of charming lore and history up and down this river. Talking about the naval battle of Memphis, all right, you think about this being on the high bluff. We started laying those cobblestones in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. Over a 40-year period of time, we laid over 1 million cobblestones. That gave us a good, hard cobblestone wharf to bring the steamboats in, to load things off and on. 1857, the first railroad to connect the Atlantic Ocean with the Mississippi River in the history of our country came from Charleston all the way to Memphis. That's about 800 miles. I didn't hear a wow. Can you say wow?
Wow.
Okay, yeah, wow. That doesn't seem like a big deal right now, but think about this. Back during that time, you're riding a horse and buggy about 10 miles an hour over the mountains, through the hills and dales and rivers and floods and swamps. Now you're getting on a train going about 50 miles an hour with all that capacity. You can stand up and walk around. I mean, it was a game changer. That came right into Memphis, 1857. So here rolls around the Civil War. And the Union strategy number one was get control of the western rivers. That's the Tennessee River, Cumberland River, Mississippi River. That's the western part of our country at the time. And if you get control of the rivers, you control the troop and supply movement. So the Union fleet came around the Anaconda Planet, around the East Coast, Gulf of Mexico, up from New Orleans. Another fleet came down from Cairo, Bayou Madrid, Island number 10, Randolph, Fort Pillow. And on June 6, 1862, the Union fleet coming from the north and the Confederate fleet coming from the south met right here in front of Memphis here. The Union fleet had about 18 gunboats and about 80 guns. The Confederate fleet had about 8 gunboats and 18 guns. So it was about a 3-to-1 mismatch, you see. About 5,000 citizens sat on the bluffs right there and watched the naval battle of Memphis. They're out in the water half a mile away just shooting at each other in the water. There wasn't any land approaches at all ever against Memphis. So it's like watching an NFL football game or a fireworks show. Okay, the battle only lasted 90 minutes because it was such a mismatch, but it was the largest inland naval battle in the history of the world. Occurred right here on these waters, about where these boats are right now. So Memphis is quickly a northern occupied town in 1862 for the last 3 years of the war, a very strategic town. General Sherman planned the march to the sea from here. General Grant planned part of the Battle of Vicksburg from the Hunt Feeling Home, which still stands over on Beale Street in the 500 block. We were a hospital town. We housed over 7,000 wounded Union soldiers in 10 hotels and warehouses and hospitals that have been converted for that use. That was the start of our great hospital tradition in Memphis. Also, business was so good, not a single building was burned. We were a sanctuary city. We didn't even have that term. Runaway slaves, free slaves came into Memphis. Our population basically doubled during the Civil War. Both cities were losing population. Montgomery was burned, Richmond burned, Atlanta burned. No land battles here at all. We're untouched. Union occupation, probably the most important city or town in the Civil War for the Union was Memphis. And Business was so good that First National Bank actually opened here in the middle of the Civil War. It's the 14th oldest bank chart. Why would you open a bank in the middle of the Civil War? Because business was so darn good here with this safe port and rail and everything. So we outlasted all that, 1865, and then another tragedy struck. The quickest way to get Union soldiers released POWs from Cahaba, from Andersonville, coming across Alabama, Mississippi to Vicksburg was by steamboat, okay? Not the rails, not the roads. So steamboats were sent down to New Orleans, Natchez, Vicksburg. Certificates were relaxed. Captains were incentivized. $5 for every enlisted man, $10 for every officer, you see. One boat called the Sultana. Again, have you heard of the Sultana? You heard of the Titanic, I know. A lot because it's a more modern boat. Well, the Sultana went downriver, came up, got to Vicksburg. This one boat certificated for 376 passengers. By the time it got to Memphis, it had over 2,300 passengers on the boat, 6 times its legal limit, 100 horses, and 1 stove for a 7-mile trip. We probably got 250 people on this boat right now. How would you like to have 1,000 on here? And about 40 horses, okay? And no nacho machine down there, you know. Going upriver for 7 miles. So they got to Memphis, got to those cobblestones right over there, all floated about 250 hogsheads of sugar. They said, well, hogshead's like a barrel, fancy old term. Loaded off. It might have deballasted the boat a little bit. They went up the old channel. I'll show you the old channel in a minute. Went about 7 miles up the old channel, and the boilers blew. Bodies flowed by Memphis for days. Over 1,700 people lost their life that one day. The largest maritime disaster in the history of our country. Right where we are right now. Bodies flowed by here, the Sultana. April 27th, 1865. Over here in Marion, Arkansas, about 10 miles to our west, there is a Sultana Disaster Museum, a little small 2-room museum, a real nice model of the Sultana, names of all the victims and survivors. And there's plans to build about a $10 million museum over there in the next few years. So just Google Sultana, S-U-L-T-A-N-A. Over here, a little chip shot here for PSA for Arkansas. Over here in what we call the sunken land. You know, in 1811 and 1812, there's a big series of earthquakes here. They say church bells rang as far away as Charleston, South Carolina, about 800 miles. They said the river flowed backwards. It just went to a depressed area. Reelfoot Lake in northwest Tennessee was formed during that time. But we call that the sunken land over in Arkansas. It's really flat. And you got the Dice Colony over there, about 45 minutes to our north. The Johnny Cash Boyhood Home Museum, that's a great experience. The Southern Tenants Farming Museum. The Hemingway Pfeiffer House, where Hemingway wrote a part of the Farewell to Arms in Arkansas, all run by, and there's a Japanese Internment Museum down here by Helena, all run by Arkansas State University Department of History. Really neat museums over in Arkansas, the sunken land. And another thing here, I hadn't talked about yet, again, the agriculture here. Back in the 19th century, there were 400 sawmills in this area. You had all this bottomland hardwood forest through here. So we were the hardwood capital of America during that time. From 1880 to 1920, 70% of the cotton crop in America was within 200 miles of Memphis, 70%. So we're the cotton capital of the world. Between 1803 and 1937, the #1 export out of America was cotton, okay? And then right now, between Memphis and Little Rock, which is about 135 miles to our west, 45% of the rice crop grows in America. Big rice country right over here in eastern Arkansas, middle Arkansas. We might get a little bit of his wake right there. Now, that's what the jet skiers like. They love coming right up behind these towboats and just going right into that wake right there, you know. City skyline lays out pretty good right now, I think. Let's talk about Memphis music for a minute, okay? Since we're on the river, we always got to talk about music. The Smithsonian Institution in 2000 opened the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum. It's right down there in the FedEx Forum complex. And what their quote was, "This is the National Museum of American History of the finest museum system in the world, the Smithsonian, saying, in the quest to identify the roots of America's music, all roads led to Memphis." They looked at the whole country, said Memphis. Willie Dixon down there in Vicksburg says, "The blues are the roots and the rest are the fruits." That's his quote down there. That's the original American music art form. So when you think about the field hollers and the work songs and the spirituals out in those cotton fields and farms over the century, they came up that blues highway, Highway 61. All the musicians came into Beale Street at the turn of last century. Now, one of the quotes by Lieutenant George W. Lee, who was one of the black Republican operatives here for Robert Church Sr. and Robert Church Jr., his quote was, "Beale Street was a mile of vice and commercial ambition owned by the Jews, policed by the whites, and enjoyed by the Negroes." It was a segregated city for the first half of the century, up until, well, for all of the 19th century, but as you came up through the 20th century. Blacks could go to Beale Street, couldn't go to Main Street, whites could go down there. So the huge population, you think about the in-migration from the Delta during the Civil War, during Reconstruction, in the 1890s, the 1930s, the immigration from Europe in the 1890s, the Jewish, the Irish, the German, the Italian coming into this area, caused the roadways and the bridge and everything. Between 1900, we had 100,000 people in Memphis in 1900 on our census, but in 1880 we only had 10,000. You know, we grew 900%, let's say, in 2 decades. But only less than 10% of those people were actually born in Memphis. So way back then, we're a big melting pot. Beale Street was a center where anything would go on. Vice, gambling. We had houses of commercial affection. Openly. I guess y'all know what the shorter word for that is, right? On Beale Street. Cocaine capital of the world, murder capital of the world. Is anything goes, everybody, white, black, brown, you name it. Tough city, but W.C. Handy comes up from, you know, we talk about a Memphis music tree real quick. Nobody was from Memphis. They all came to Memphis. W.C. Handy came from Florence, Alabama, the blues. Sam Phillips came from Florence, Alabama, rock and roll. Elvis Presley from Tupelo. B.B. King from Itta-Bena. Jerry Lee Lewis from Louisiana. Al Green from Forest City, Arkansas. Johnny Cash from Dice, Arkansas. Carl Perkins from Tiptonville. Isaac Hayes, Black Moses, from Brownsville, Tennessee. Tina Turner from Nutbush. On and on and on. They came to Memphis because this was a social, cultural, business, banking, food, transportation, vice, capital of the whole 150-mile area. Everything came to Memphis during that time. W.C. Handy came up to Beale Street. He was kind of operating out of a place called Pee Wee Saloon. It's right there at Rufus Thomas and Beale on the southeast corner. The building's gone now, but they had a public payphone. He could call and book his bands, and when he wasn't doing that in the day, he'd be writing music. And he got real popular. He was taking that European music and melding it with the blues style that he heard at some of the train stops, and putting music and notes and lyrics to paper like nobody else had done before. 1909, he got called by a man running for mayor, his operatives, Mr. Crump, to write a blues song. It's called Mr. Crump, or a song for his campaign, which 3 years later he got permission to change to the Memphis Blues. And in 1912, at 4th and Beale, the Pace and Handy Music Company, the first blues song was published in America, Memphis Blues. One of these buildings right over here, I'll point out to you when we get closer to it. In 1916, that's where he premiered the St. Louis Blues out of, in the Alaska Roof Garden of that building. W.C. Handy left, went to New York, and of course went on to be the father of the blues. Passed away in 1958. Handy Park there on Beale Street was named for him. At the crossroads of America's music. It used to be 3rd Street and Beale Street. Now it's B.B. King Boulevard and Beale Street, you know. Very appropriately named the crossroads of America's music. So we get into the jazz era after that. Again, all the blues musicians came into Beale Street. 1927, I believe it was, is when the Memphis Jug Band got first recorded here, maybe 1925, by Ralph Peer. Then the jazz musicians came. Jimmy Lunsford was a black teacher at Manassas High School. He had the Chickasaw Syncopators. His band was so good, he went to New York, rivaled Count Basie, Duke Ellington. So we had a lot of great jazz pianists and saxophone players come through. 1948, we opened the first all-black formatted radio station in the world here, WDIA, on Union Avenue. John Pepper and Bert Ferguson did that. B.B. King and Rufus Thomas were 2 of the first DJs there. B.B. had come up from Itta-Bena. You know where Itta-Bena is, don't you? It's near Indianola. You don't know where Indianola is? Greenwood? Memphis? About 200 miles that way. But he came up from Itta-Bena through Arkansas one winter, playing at a juke joint over here in Twist, Arkansas. Okay, B.B. King. Riley B. King Beale Street Blues Boys with the BB. B-E-E was his middle name when he was born. And there was a potbelly stove in there, and two guys got in a fight over the waitress, and somebody kicked over the potbelly stove, and it caught on fire, and everybody ran out of the burning building. And BB remembered he left his guitar inside. That's the only thing he had he could use in Memphis to get a job. So BB ran back into the burning building to save his guitar. And it turns out the name of the waitress they were fighting over was, all right, music people here, Lucille. And we used to make that Lucille guitar here at the Gibson Guitar Factory, a solid body guitar. BB came to Memphis. Rufus really helped him out in the shows. BB King did about 15,000 shows in his life, probably 90% of them from that bus. He was very old school. I got to work with him a little bit. Willie got to, I'm sure, several times there. Just a great ambassador for the blues. His first BB King restaurant is open there at 2nd and Beale. A great place to go to. If you go in there, the music's downstairs. But go up through the stairwell in the center or the stairwell out back. There's a restaurant there on the 3rd floor run by BB King, a corporation called Itabena, I-T-T-A-B-E. And it doesn't have a sign on it or anything. It's almost fine dining. It's not that slick, but it's good dining. It's not your normal barbecue of Beale Street with the beer signs on the wall and brick and all that. That's a real good experience. Go on top of BB King's in Memphis to Itabena. So BB made it here. Now from 1949 to 1958, over here at the Hotel Chiska, which is straight across from me right now, that kind of a dark colored brick building with the sign on top of it. That's the Hotel Chiska. Well, WHBQ was there, and a man by the name of Dewey Phillips was there. Now he was a fast talking DJ, talked faster than I did. Had a program called Red, Hot, and Blue, and he would play anything. For anybody. He would come from Red, Hot, and Blue. This is Dewey Phillips. He'd drink a lot too. Dewey Phillips from the mezzanine level, WHBQ here at the Hotel Chiska. By the middle of the show, he was coming from the magazine level. By the end of the show, he was coming from the mayonnaise level, drinking himself silly. But from 1948 to 1949 to 1958, he was playing music by white artists and music by black artists in the same hour on the same radio station in the South. It was unheard of at the time, but it was the music the kids loved and the parents hated. And folks, that's always generational, isn't it? Always generational. The music the parents hate, the kids love. It happened to me. My mother didn't like the Beatles and the British invasion. I think because the hair over the eyebrows and the ears and the collar. But that happened in the 60s. So one night, now you got Sam Phillips. You've heard of Sam Phillips, right? Memphis Recording Service became Sun Studio. In 1950, Sam opened up, Sam in the 1940s was over at the Peabody Hotel in the Skyway Room, and he was the engineer for all the big band music. It was one of 3 rooms in the country that broadcast over CBS National Radio Network, New York, Memphis, Los Angeles, the big band swing music, the Dorsey Brothers, all those folks, Glenn Miller, Les Brown, the band of renown. Sam got really bored with that. He was drawn to that raw, gutsy sound of Beale Street. So at 706 Union Avenue, right where Beale Street ends out there, he opened Memphis Recording Service in 1950. And he was recording black artists like Howlin' Wolf and B.B. King and Johnny Ace and Roscoe Gordon, Rufus Thomas. But Rufus told me Sam was looking for a white boy who could sing black music. Sam was looking for a white boy who could sing black music. And of course, he finally found that. Elvis would walk up and down Beale Street. He'd come to Memphis in like 1947, lived over here at Hurt Village by the Pyramid, would walk up and down Beale Street. He was drawn to that sound. He'd go out to Orange Mound, ride around with some of the black kids in the cars. Still know some of those folks to this day, go to the Handy Theater out there. He really loved that black music. So he heard Big Boy Arthur Crudup singing That's All Right, just an old blues song in Handy Park one night, sitting on a pickle bucket. So they're in the studio. Elvis has been in the studio several times, didn't have a hit. Sam Phillips matched him up with Scotty Moore and Bill Black. July 5th, 1954, they're in the studio. Nothing's going right, so they take a break. Elvis goes over and picks up Scotty Moore's guitar in a fit of nervous energy, starts going over here in the corner by himself, banging out, That's All Right, Mama, really fast. Sam comes running out of the control room saying, that's it, that's the sound I'm looking for in the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum video. Sam says, it's like I got stuck in the rear end with a brand new super sharp pitchfork. Pow, that sound just found them. Sometimes in your life you got to stand still and let things find you. So they took that record, took an acetate down because they were cheap to Dewey Phillips, Sam did, here at WHBQ, July the 8th, 1954. There it is over there now. It moved. And Dewey played it over 15 times that night because the kids kept on calling in. Again, the music the kids loved and the parents hated. And that's what broke Elvis' career. So right there at Hotel Chisco, the first ever Elvis record went over the airways out of WHBQ, Dewey Phillips. Dewey died at a young age, but Memphis is the only city in America to have 2 Tony Award-winning musicals about its music history. Memphis, the musical, loosely based on Dewey's life, and then the $1 Million Quartet, later on out of Sun Studio. Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, Elvis Presley. All recorded out of Sun Studio. Charlie Rich, Roy Orbison, a lot of great names there. Sam later sold Sun Studio. And then, look at some of that driftwood right there. Getting all ruffled up here. Maybe the river's rising again, Robert. Here comes the driftwood, rising a little bit. Yeah, so it's when the river starts rising, the driftwood starts coming out. So 1955, Sam Phillips and that man, Kimmons Wilson, I told you about a few minutes ago, thought it'd be a good idea to put a microphone in front of a woman and let her talk on the radio. What in the world were they thinking at that time, you know? But it was 8 women, and the name of the radio station, the third Holiday Inn ever on South 3rd Street, in what we call Soulsville now, was WHER. It was billed as the first all-girls radio station in the nation. 8 ladies were the first female DJ. So not only did we break the color barrier in radio in Memphis, Tennessee in 1948 for our country, we broke the gender barrier in radio. Little old Memphis, Tennessee, home of the blues, birthplace of rock and roll. What's left over after that? Well, in 1958, a white brother and sister by the name of, look at that piece right over there. Wait till that thing hits your propeller in a little ski boat. It'll knock you silly. You got to watch out for this stuff right here, particularly at night. So they opened up a recording studio in Brunswick, Tennessee, in the northeastern part of Shelby County, named Satellite. They got sued for the name infringement by a company in California. So they moved down here to 926 East McLemore in the old Capitol Theater. They took the first 2 letters of their last name, the ST of Stewart, the AX of Axton, and made Stax. And that's the home of soul music in America. 800 singles, 300 albums in 15 years. Hold On, I'm Coming, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, Soul Man, Isaac Hayes, Eddie Floyd, not B.B. King, let's see, Booker T and the MGs, Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, on and on, Carla Thomas, Rufus Thomas, some of the greatest songs. Blacks and whites working in the studio together when they couldn't eat at a lunch counter together or go to a movie theater together, making the best music in the history of the world, I think. Some of my favorite songs. Soulsville, the Stax Museum of American Soul Music, reopened that area in 2003. If you want to go see a great museum in Memphis, the opening film is worth the price of admission alone, going through Stax. Sun Studios open as a studio tour. Memphis Rock and Soul Museum. We now have the Blues Museum right across from the National Civil Rights Museum on South Main. Center for Southern Folklore has live music there at night. Of course, Beale Street is now the highest revenue grossing tourist attraction in the state of Tennessee, about 25 clubs of live music there. And of course, this little place named Graceland down here is the second most visited house, historic home in the country, second to the White House. And when we get the government to shut down, the federal government, that means the White House is closed. So we're number 1 for about 2 weeks every year, you know. Graceland is. Great places to visit. I highly encourage you going to all those places right there. Home of the blues, birthplace of rock and roll, cradle of soul, crossroads of America's music. Heck, back in 1971, Isaac Hayes had a #1 song, the first ever African American to win a Best Oscar and Grammy for a motion picture soundtrack for Shaft. He wanted to be Shaft. They already picked Richard Roundtree, so he wrote the music. You fast forward 36 years later, we have a Best Song, Oscar-winning song from 3-6 Mafia out of Memphis. You remember that? And Hustle and Flow. It's hard out there for a pimp. Remember that? Memphis Band. Oh, yeah. 3 years ago. Okay. The last #1 song recorded in Memphis until 3 years ago was in 1976. Does anybody know the name of that song? It is the worst song ever in the worst era of music ever. I sound Disco Duck. You got it. Anybody remember Disco Duck? Rick Dees was a local DJ. It was a novelty song he did at Stax. The Disco Duck guy was a guy from a 7-Eleven over here in West Memphis. Bobby Manuel's on the song, really. And they recorded, I'm a disco duck, you know, all that stuff, just crazy. So he was a DJ, and he played it on his own radio station, was against the rules, so he got fired, so he went to another station in Memphis, became #1 in the country, and that's Rick Dees, went to California, became Rick Dees Top 40 on Sunday morning out of Memphis, Tennessee. We've had some great DJs here, Dewey Phillips, Wink Martindale, B.B. King, Rufus Thomas, oh my goodness, George Klein. So that was a great song. A couple of house songs get made. Here's a good story. I got told this by David Porter. He wrote Soul Man. But David Porter and Isaac Hayes were in the studio at Stax late one night. Things weren't going right. They're always in the studio late at night. Things weren't going right. So David took a break, went to the restroom. Isaac got impatient. Come on, David. Come on, David. David comes out of the restroom going, hold on, I'm coming. Hold on, I'm coming. And that's how Hold On, I'm Coming got written. That's just by David goofing up in the studio one night. Ann Peebles, I Can't Stand the Rain. You ever heard that song? Against My Window. Ann Peebles, Memphis, Tennessee. It was storming and raining. I couldn't get to my car at night in the driveway, so I came back in, sat down at the piano, started banging on the piano. I can't stand the rain against my window. That's how I Can't Stand the Rain got written. You know, a sad story. Otis Redding. How many think Otis Redding was the greatest ever? Well, raise those hands now. Come on, y'all gotta love Otis. He died at age 27. He was a bus driver, came into here. These Arms of Mine was like sung on the 4th take at Stax record when he's a bus driver. But on December the 7th, 1967, he's in the studio with his high school band, the Barkays from Booker T. Washington High School in the neighborhood there. They couldn't travel during the week. They had to record late at night, go to school, travel on the weekends. So it's a Thursday night. They're trying to record sitting on the dock of the bay. Steve Cropper is the engineer. Otis kind of is getting tired, forgets the words, starts whistling the words in the 3rd verse. Steve Cropper comes out saying, that's it, you got to go to school tomorrow, y'all got to get on the road to Cleveland. We'll finish this up next week. So they get on the road, they fly to Cleveland on December the 10th, and his plane crashes in the lake there by Madison, Wisconsin. He's killed. All the Barkays are killed except for one, Ben Colley, who held on to a seat cushion because he couldn't swim. And oddly, he sang in the airport bar for 30 years. If I've survived a plane crash, I wouldn't go near an airport again, much less sing in a bar for 30 years. Great man, I got to meet him. So when they came back to finish sitting on the dock of the bay, they didn't have the words for the last verse. So think about the next time, there you go, do it again. I can't whistle, so that was good. They left the whistle part in there. He died while that song was being recorded, technically, you see, and that's the meaning of the end of that song. See, back during that time in the 60s, black and white bands that were mixed like that weren't accepted in the South. You know, the Booker T and the MGs would show up, 2 are black, 2 are white. You're not that sound. Steve Cropper, Duck Dunn with a guitar and the bass. They were funky as anybody, and people wouldn't accept them. So they had to go to California to the Monterey Jazz Festival, or go to Europe where they're well accepted, not in the South. So Otis is out there in California one year, sitting on the Sausalito Bay, heading towards the Frisco Bay. That's where that was. The thoughts came for that song. Otis Redding, a great, great singer, I think. We're coming upon now. Oh, and then the next #1 song was 3 years ago. Anybody know the next #1 song out of Memphis? Uptown Funk, Boo Mitchell. That guy Bruno Mars out of Royal Studios right over here, Uptown Funk. That was a great song right there. Played at the Super Bowl, right? Here's the Hernando de Soto Bridge, opened in 1973. Name for Hernando de Soto, we call it the Bridge of Lights, the new bridge, the I-40 bridge. Some people call it the Dolly Parton Bridge. I don't. This span right here is 1,760 feet long. That's the longest freestanding letter of the alphabet in the world. 1,760 feet long, the big M. Okay? Now, back in 1986, on September the 5th, after it was built, we had a big party over here on Mud Island called Old Man River Gets Lit. We had 2,000 people over at Mud Island that donated $500 million. We got them lit. They donated the money. We put the metal halide lights on there, 200 lights. They were there for about, 32 years. And last year we converted to the LED lights that hang down the strings. It's called Mighty Lights. They change color. So both ends of our riverfront are now nicely lit up at night with LED lighting when you come out here to the center. Look up and down the river tonight when you come back. Now we're going underneath this span right here that's 880 feet long. Once upon a time, until 1973, the river used to come in from that direction over there to the northwest. Now imagine, you saw that downriver barge tow before we took off, come down and try to navigate through the lower bridges and cut like that. Imagine bringing something that's 1,000 feet long at an angle through here, turning, not hitting Mud Island, and going through. It was just going to be impossible. So what they did is they went 5 miles upriver and cut the river channel around the east side of the island right there. So this guy right here can get a straight shot coming right down through. Then he's still got to navigate the 3 lower bridges, because 2 of those bridges were built before the barge industry got real big. They're just little steamboats going through here. The last steamboat left Memphis in 1926. So here comes another one downriver. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 5. That's about 25 barges there, full of something, probably grain of some kind. He's going to get a straight shot coming right through here and clear on out. I knew he's going to do that. So there's one going upriver. Downriver trows get the right of way. They're going about twice as fast as the other boats. But he's got a pretty solid shot coming through that eastern span over there. So there's the old channel right there now. So we go back to the 1930s when the Flood Control Act occurred. The Corps of Engineers cut off 170 miles of river. It was just going like this, okay? So they cut through some of those loops like that, made oxbow lakes out there that people fish on and everything now, and cut off 170 miles of river. But they didn't want to cut it off too much and make it too straight, because then it would go too fast, get out of control. You can't control the Mississippi River. You can only accommodate her, you know. It would drain the watersheds maybe too fast. You'd need this habitat here for the whole environment with the animals and the plant life and everything. So they cut off 170 miles of river. Up there in New Madrid, Missouri, if you look at the boot hill there, you go a half a mile across the land right there at that neck, but you go 19 miles around that bend to get to there. That slows the river down too a little bit, going back upriver, going back down. You don't circumvent the power plant and the grain elevators up there either. So there's a lot of strategy to all that. So that gets filled in. Now we're at 22 feet on the river gauge. When we get, that's probably about 7 feet deep right out there, okay? Yes, ma'am.
There you go.
Due to no mobility, I don't read it. Oh, well. If you haven't seen your picture, it will be behind the bar if you'd like to see it again. I'm going to save that because that's Katie writing that note to me. I won't tell you what she wrote above there, okay? So, I mean, that is all sand up there, usually at this time of the year. I mean, you can't even get an airboat up through there. You can see some of the trees growing out on the rock dikes right there. Normally, when we get down on the Arkansas side, you'll see rock dikes come out about 300 or 400 yards perpendicular from the bank. And what that happens, that makes the water go slow on that side of the river because it hits a rock dike and all that siltation drops down right there. On the Tennessee side over here, that channel over there is probably about 70 feet deep. Over here, it's probably about 10 to 15 feet deep or 20 feet deep over here. Because the way that they've configured that, the dredge comes in the fall each year during the low water time of the year to do some dredging. So he's moving pretty good right through there. Looking up here at the pyramid, anybody notice the pyramid over here? That's the 6th tallest pyramid in the world, 2nd tallest in America, tallest east of the Mississippi. You see, I can make us #1 in anything when I make up my own category. Tallest in America is the Luxor Casino in Las Vegas, and the 4th tallest, we call that Las Vegas here. You just call it Vegas. Vegas. There's 4 over there in Giza. Of course, Memphis got its namesake from Memphis on the Nile River, being very similar to the Delta. We were founded, like I said, in 1819 by James Winchester, John Overton, and Isaac Shelby, who lived in the Nashville area. They never lived here. We're the 3rd state to join the Union during that time, after the original 13 colonies, Vermont, Kentucky, then Tennessee. And for the first 22 years, we're a state. All of West Tennessee is not owned by the state of Tennessee. It's owned by the Chickasaw Nation. So we've had a lot of variety here. Now the pyramid opened in 1991 to replace our Mid-South Coliseum, which was 11,000 seat basketball and concert arena from the 1960s. We needed a 20,000 seat arena for the Tiger basketball, the bigger concerts. So why not build a pyramid shaped arena, 20,000 seats, open up to the top. That's 1.5 million cubic feet in there, 280 feet high. You can see that top glass level up there. You see an outdoor balcony now on the west side and on the south side. When you go up there, that's a 280-foot elevator, freestanding elevator, the tallest of its kind in the country, out to 10,000 square feet up there inside in those two balconies. It's safe. You can see 21 miles in every direction from up there, okay? Now, 1991, Tigers come downtown. All the big concerts come here. And in 2001, some of our good, well-meaning citizens thought we ought to get an NBA basketball team here. So, of course, we went and got the worst team ever, the Vancouver Grizzlies, to transfer here. Now, I was a score clock operator at that time in the pyramid, so I know all the details here. They had lost the quickest to lose 100, 200, 300 games in the history of the NBA. So that's a record. You can't dispute that. Then we hired the logo to be our general manager, Jerry West, Hubie Brown to be our coach. We get in the playoffs in our third year. We lose 12 straight playoff games in 3 years. 2 records of futility. Okay? To get the Grizzlies, we had to build a new, modern, state-of-the-art NBA arena, which is FedEx Forum, down here. It opened 2004 with a no-compete clause. So this building can't have concerts, can't have basketball games or nothing. The Tigers moved with the Grizzlies to FedEx Forum in 2004. This building stays empty for 11 years. And $130 million later, between the city and Bass Pro, a big Bass Pro store opens there. Anybody heard of Bass Pro? There's about 100 in the country now. And now you got 1.5 million cubic feet to fill up in there. So they have these 100-foot tall rock formations, 100-foot tall cedar trees in there, the 280-foot freestanding elevator up to the top. There's 550,000 square feet of retail in there of all kinds, 600,000 gallons of water in pools in the aquarium with fishes, turtles, ducks, and alligators in there. Okay, there's 2 restaurants, an archery range, a bowling alley, a shooting range. The big Cypress Lodge is 105 seats. It's one of the top 10 hotels in the world, according to Forbes magazine. And Forbes is really good about bashing Memphis, so we do some stupid things here, you know. That's a great accomplishment. The first year they were open, they had 3 million visitors. They did $52 million in sales, I think it was, and they sold 12 tons of fudge. So when you go inside there, I say it's like Pigeon Forge comes to Memphis, okay, if you know what I mean. Now here's how you do it. You don't want to go in there in the daytime, because there's plenty of things for families and people like us to do in the daytime. Nighttime, and if you don't have a Grizzlies basketball game, a Tiger basketball game, a Redbirds baseball game, a 901 FC soccer game, or a family show at the Orpheum or riding the trolley, basically everything else is for adults downtown, drinking and music and all that stuff, Beale Street, you know. So go over there at sunset time and eat dinner over there. If you buy an entree, your elevator rides for free. You see, usually $10. How about that? How about that little tip, Jimmy O? And you get to, it's open till like 10 o'clock at night, so you get to see the sunset. My grandkids were here. We named every fish in every aquarium in there, and then went bowling and ate dinner. It was a cool time, indoors, safe, free. Everything else is free in there, except you got to buy the clothes or the boats or guns or whatever, you know. So that was a good readaptive use. Most arenas in most cities either convert into churches, like in Houston, the Houston Summit, or they tear them down. How can we tear down the 6th tallest pyramid in the world? Now that's gleaming, number 3 brushed, gleaming stainless steel right there. There's over 8,000 panels that are 30 inches by 16 feet and 8 acres of stainless steel all the way around that big facility. 321 feet tall, 6 football fields at its base. That's how it widens out. Go to Bass Pro. I don't hunt, fish, canoe, chew. I don't do any of that stuff. I have fun in there. And then 3 blocks to the east is the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, the ALSAC Pavilion, ALSAC. That's American Lebanese Syrian Associated Charities. That supports, this is a fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Before I say that, real quickly, 106-acre Greenbelt Park, and now there's 7,000 people living out on this island right here, 5 minutes from the core downtown. That all opened in 1987, and it's been building, so it's full. A lot has happened in downtown Memphis lately. Back to St. Jude, Danny Thomas came here in 1962, opened St. Jude, had a less than 4% success rate that year, incurring the catastrophic childhood diseases of cancer and leukemia. A $1 million budget for the entire year. Now the success rate has grown to be about 90%, but it costs $2.5 million a day to operate the hospital. And remember now, no family or child pays for their travel, their treatment, their housing, their food on any visit to St. Jude. It's the true miracle of Memphis. Getting ready to do another big expansion over here, employs about 5,000 people. The heart and soul of downtown Memphis. Of course, the proceeds from this week's PGA Tour tournament goes to St. Jude. It's named a name and title sponsor. The two most solid brands in Memphis are FedEx and St. Jude, we think. Danny Thomas is actually buried there over there by the pavilion. It's a free museum about the history of Danny Thomas, St. Jude, Danny Thomas being the entertainer, the humanitarian, and of course about Alsac. It's a real nice visit there, and there are hospital tours too. You'd be encouraged when you go in there, particularly to see the attitudes of the children, the patients, the families, the doctors. It's a really special place. All right, we're coming back underneath the bridge again, heading downriver. I called up that breeze for everybody. I was getting a little bit hot there. I hope you don't mind me calling up that breeze. It's going to mess up my hair, but it's okay. Looking at the Memphis city skyline as we come underneath as well. Now this is Mud Island River Park. The monorail bridge comes over. That's the 18 gallery Mississippi River Museum. It's about 35,000 square feet. First gallery takes you on the stories of the Native Americans, explorers, settlers. You go into a scale model of an 1870 steamboat about this size inside there, the front third of it. You got a modern towboat pilot house, a gallery, about river folk characters, steamboat captains, gamblers, vaudevillians, levee workers, a gallery on levee control, river control, 5 galleries on the Civil War on the river, 5 galleries about Memphis music, then a changing exhibit hall, an aquarium, and to a river walk. There's a 5-block long, 1,500-foot long scale model of the lower Mississippi River. 130-inch step equals a mile in distance. It's got every twist and turn in there. There's 1,746 pieces, 4 foot by 8 foot by 4 feet deep. They go into place like a jigsaw puzzle. Every twist and turn from Cairo all the way down. 65 informational panels along the way. It's real nice and shaded all through here where the trees are. 20 cities laid out right there, water running through it to the Gulf of Mexico. It's a very unique model. Great views of the city like this. There's our governmental plaza. There's the convention center. The tallest building, the one with the round thing on top, looks like a flying saucer. That was built in 1965. That's the tallest building in Memphis, the 100 North Main building. Back in 1965 when it opened, I was 12 years old, and I put my swimming suit on in East Memphis and caught a bus and came down there and swam on the swimming pool on the top floor. Then went to the top of the 100 Club to eat. And it revolved around 1 revolution per hour, about 4 miles an hour. Not like a merry-go-round, it's kind of slow. That was neat. The building next to it is the Renaissance building. It's a residential. The dark colored brick building is the former Raymond, well, it's the Raymond James building now. It opened as Morgan Keegan Tower, opened in 1987. The yellow building back in the back there is the Steric building. It was the tallest building in the entire South of any city when it opened in 1930. The last skyscraper built in Memphis for 34 years because of the Depression, World War II, and post-World War II suburbanization with the automobiles and neighborhoods. The green roof building in front of it was the Exchange building, built in 1910, 19 stories tall. It was the tallest building in Memphis. The First Tennessee building, right next to the Steric building, it opened in 1964. The I-Bank building opened in 1973. It's in Maine and Monroe. And the trees kind of block us right now. This is the Riverwalk right in front of us here. Back in 2011, we had our second ever highest water. The river was up over Mud Island, over that wall right there, all the way up to Greenville on the Riverwalk, into the amphitheater. It didn't quite flood the rest of the island, but it was 2 feet of water over all this right here. That's how high they got. 24 feet higher straight up, okay? 5 miles wide. The water was coming down at 900,000 gallons a minute at about 15 miles an hour. That's a real destructive force of water, like a drill bit. In fact, it was out of the channel when it went down to make that turn at President's Island and started cutting across President's Island and cut into the bank and did a lot of damage for about 2 weeks till it started coming back down and getting back into its natural channel. Here's another river tow coming up river. They're empty, aren't they? See how good your eyes are now? You can look through there and see that they're empty. Got to get upriver for September and October for the harvest, and they'll come back downriver. So they got to get back upriver somehow, empty. Hey, you see the one flag flying over here on the 7 flagpoles? It used to be 7 flags. You see the Memphis sign right there? Those are the 7 flags of jurisdiction over the last 468 years, beginning in 1541 with Spain. The 1760s was France. The 1670s was France. The 1760s was Great Britain. 1780s, United States of America, 1782. And North Carolina. North Carolina came all the way across. So Tennessee broke off from North Carolina, 1796. And then Confederate States for 1 year. So we only fly the United States flag here now. At about 24 feet on the river gauge, this lower point of Mud Island goes underwater. At about 38 feet, that next level goes under. At about 42 feet, where the Memphis is, that goes underwater. We've seen that happen in the last 6 years in the spring of the year. Hey, this glass building right in front of us with the AutoZone sign on it, guess what? Who's in that building? AutoZone. This started in Memphis in 1979 as Auto Shack. Got sued by Radio Shack for the name infringement. Now there's 6,000 AutoZones and no Radio Shacks. Ha, pit high. You know, 1916, we changed the way the world shopped for groceries in Memphis, Tennessee. We opened the first self-service grocery store here in downtown Memphis. Piggly Wiggly, Clarence Saunders. He put a turnstile in and let you go get your own groceries. You had to go every aisle. Can you imagine going to Kroger now and going through every aisle? How many murders would there be in Kroger? And the milk would still be in the back, right? That was a great innovation for Memphis. A man named Baron Collier came from Memphis. He's the father of streetcar advertising out of the Pinch District. He was the guy that invented the yellow and white stripes on the highway. Now somebody had to do that, right? And of course they had to come from Memphis, right? You know, we invented the hydraulic automobile lift. Yeah, somebody had to lift that car up so you could change the oil, you know? The automatic fire door, things like that. A lot of creative people are in Memphis. We're coming into the dock. Now, when we hit this dock over here, we'll nudge into it. It'll take about 3 or 4 minutes to tie off, so just be patient coming off. I think we want the Colemans to kind of linger and get their picture made, right, or something like that. We'll just see. From Mississippi, right? We love Mississippi. Memphis, Tennessee, like I said, good, bad, or ugly. We had the first ever Public Enemy #1, Machine Gun Kelly. First one ever caught by the FBI, too. We made them famous, you know. Nike distributes over 190 million pairs of shoes a year through Memphis. We're #1 in Nike world. Have you ever seen an MGM movie? You have. You seen the lion roaring in the logo at the first of the movie? Guess where he's from?
Memphis.
Very good. Every answer is Memphis. From the Memphis Zoo. Now, if you're listening, what's he saying when he's roaring? He goes, Memphis, Memphis. Did you listen that closely? No. Well, he doesn't. That's the only lie I've told you all day. Everything else I've told you is true. He goes roar, 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 roar. And even I can't get Memphis out of that. But, you know, we got another 140 hours to go on stuff like this, not just about the river. Like I said, our history is just unmatched and so much to talk about. Captain's going to go up here a little bit and come back in at a different angle against the wind. See the monorail bridge there? Back in 1993, I was running Mud Island, and they had the movie The Firm here. Anybody remember Mitch McDear, Bendini, Lambert, and Locke? A guy named Tom Cruise. We saw him stunt double more than anything. That's the monorail he rode back and forth on, went to the museum, got chased across there. Then we had People versus Larry Flint. We had 2 other John Grissom books. The Rainmaker, The Client, filmed here. Great Balls of Fire, the Jerry Lee Lewis story. Walk the Line, the one that Reese Witherspoon won the Academy Award for. Black Snake Moan, Hustle and Flow. Right now, Jimmy Smits is in town with Bluff City Law. NBC TV. They're filming in downtown. You'll see some of the streets blocked for that. So we do pretty good with the movies. Oh, since we're going up the harbor here a little bit. You know, back during the 1960s, we had a lot of turbulence in our country. The civil rights movement played out bigger than any other city in the country. Dr. King got brought to town in 1968 to get equal rights for the black sanitation workers. 2 had been killed on the job, and there just wasn't appropriate benefits, and the 1,100 black workers went on strike. for better benefits. Dr. King came. The last two public events of Dr. King's life were in Memphis, Tennessee. The last march of his life, March 28, 1968, and the last speech. The last march got broken up. He was practicing for the Poor People's March later on that year in Washington, D.C. And it was about nonviolent, peaceful protests. He wasn't about throwing rocks and burning down buildings. He was going to do everything legal. That was his stance for 10 years there. So he comes back after that march gets broken up, goes to Mason Temple on April 3rd, gives the last speech of his life. I've been to the mountaintop. That's down in the Soulsville neighborhood, Mason Temple, I past Crump. Claiborne Temple's up here. We have the I'm a Man Plaza up here right by FedEx Forum now. And he comes back and he's waiting out the court injunction that was lifted on April the 4th, just a few hours shortly before he was killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. He had stayed at the black-owned hotel with the open balconies that night. You know the story from there. It's the site of the most watershed moment of the civil rights movement in our country. 23 years later, the National Civil Rights Museum opened there. 10 years later, they expanded across the street. 15 years later, did a $30 million upgrade. It's the finest civil rights museum in the country on the spot. That is our public meeting stop when there's every protest going on in the country now, whether it's Black Lives Matter or gay rights or whatever. That's our Civic Center Plaza now, not down by these government buildings. It's really established itself, and I encourage everybody to go to the National Civil Rights Museum tomorrow. About closed today. It's closed on Tuesdays, I think. Go to the Peabody Hotel where the Ducks march at 5 o'clock. I used to be the Duck Master there. That's the goofiest thing in the world. 250,000 people here watch the Ducks march. They're only here for 90 days at a time, 3 months. We get a whole new set of ducks every 3 months. We learn how to walk behind ducks to a fountain, you know. Beale Street will be alive tonight. Hamilton's in town. I think it's his third week of Hamilton, the Broadway shows in town at the Orpheum Theater. You know, in 1975, the Peabody was closed. It was bought on the courthouse steps for $550,000. The Orpheum was saved for $285,000 in 1986. The Lorraine Motel for $144,000 on the courthouse steps. For less than $1 million in a 7-year period of time, we saved the Peabody, the Orpheum, and the Civil Rights Museum. Those are the three cultural cornerstones of our downtown. In 1979, more people lived in jail in downtown Memphis than residentially. We had 500 people living downtown and 1,000 in jail. We emptied out. But gradually, little by little, we built back. Peabody opened, Mud Island, Beale Street, Orpheum, Convention Center Hotel, Pyramid, FedEx Forum, Civil Rights Museum, B.B. King's, on and on and on, the Trolley, AutoZone Park. Now there's about 26,000 people living in downtown, over 100 restaurants, 20 fabulous museums in the downtown area, the Sun Studio, Stax, Metal Museum, Civil Rights Museum, Belts Museum of Asian, Judaic Art, Cotton Museum, Memphis Rock and Soul Museum, on and on and on. There's a lot to see here culturally, so we encourage you to get out and do that in our walkable downtown.